Good morning, good morning, good morning. This is Jeremias JMan Maneiro with JMan Talks Live. Our special guest today is Mr. Joe Sinnona in our new segment called MilleniWHO Talks. We're bringing you the future and the present. That's what we like to do. And with our MilleniWHO Talks, we're talking with people who have been in the industry. Could be a day, could be 3 decades, but we want to hear their stories, how they got involved in leadership, as well as some of the challenges they encountered being a young person in the industry. So, Mr. Joe Sinnona, please introduce yourself for those who don't know you.
How you doing? My name is Joe Sinnona, and I live and work in Long Beach, New York. And I've been a realtor going on my 29th year in business.
29th year. So almost celebrating your 30th anniversary.
Yes.
All right. So let's start right in the beginning. In the beginning, there was Joe. And how old were you when you started in the industry?
I was 19 years old.
19 years old. I mean, that's and that was at a time when really, I mean, it's more common now, I think, where it's first industry for some people. They graduate college, maybe they can't find employment, and then they get into real estate. But I think it was unheard of. Do you want to share what year it was that you started?
Sure. I was already in college, and I was studying to be an English teacher. And I did a 1-year teaching at 141 in the Bronx in Riverdale, New York. And I was already doing real estate part-time on the weekends, just, as the new people say, dabbling in real estate. And I was doing open houses, and I was actually a waiter as well at night on the weekends and a teacher during the week. So I had my work cut out for me.
And so what eventually made you to say, okay, I'm cutting the cords of everything else. I'm going full go.
So one day I walked into my classroom, and they thought there was a substitute teacher coming, I don't know, for some reason or another. And there was chaos and a lot of panic, and kids were just screaming and yelling. And I asked for quiet, and nobody turned around to see where I was. And I picked up a chair and I threw it to the other side of the room where there were no students. I want to go on record as saying that. And just as I did that, the head of the Board of Ed was coming down the hallway and proceeded to see me in action. So as faith would allow, I was written up and given a choice whether to take a leave of absence for my anger management or I was to leave the school. So I chose to take a leave of absence in an effort to go back there after 1 year. And P.S., I never returned because I went into real estate full time and just caught on to the real estate bug, if you will. And I decided that was going to be my new career path.
Excellent. So through adversity, greatness is achieved. You decided, you know what, these kids, they're challenging. I'm just going to go into something else that seems a little bit less stressful. And you got into real estate. Great choice. Obviously, it's been a great choice for you. Where did you first start? How did you pick your first company? And what were back then, what were some of the challenges that faced somebody starting at 19 years of age in the business?
Well, there was a lot of challenges back then. First of all, there was no real internet to speak of. And you shopped, if you were a consumer, out of a book, out of a big fat, looked like the Yellow Pages or the telephone book. And when you opened it, you had houses on each side. And the realtor was, your go-to person if you were the consumer. And that person shopped for you and picked a few houses and then showed them to you that way. Growing very, very frustrated because I had not made any money in my first 3 to 4 months, I picked a broker who basically I chose because she sold my mom and my sister and I a house. So I felt very compelled, very loyal to that person, and I went to work with her and her partner, and that was my first company. And I didn't make any money because I was just learning the ropes and trying to establish some sort of a base, an educational base for the business, because I had not fully accepted it as a business. So one night I was very frustrated. I was just about to quit, and I started to listen to some audio tapes at the time, Tom Hopkins, and I started to listen to the Keys to Success, and I started to play them over and over again in my head. And then I was watching an episode of The Honeymooners where Norton, the character of Norton, goes door to door. He gets laid off from his job, and he goes door to door selling irons. And there was like this little thing in my head that just clicked. I said, "Wow, I'm going to go door to door. I'm going to make up a flyer, and I'm going to make it as creative as possible. And I'm just going to knock on doors." And I knocked on every single door with this little spoof of a flyer. It was an image of Captain America, and I cut his head off, and I put my head on it, superimposed the picture of my head, and and then I put, when it comes to buying, selling, or renting, I said, "Let me be your super agent." That was my tagline. Yeah, so I made up like 100 of them, and I went door to door, and it was just a cut and paste of a simple flyer. I did it for 3 weeks and got an average of about 10 listings in that 3 weeks period.
Wow.
And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know anything of what I was doing. My training was very little. I learned a little bit from my brokers. I learned a little bit from Tom Hopkins. I combined the two. And it was just one of those learn as you go, which was the worst way any agent can start in the business. And then a client of mine, his name is Tom Cunningham. I have his permission to use his name. He came into my office. He was scruffy looking, and he just like was painting his house. And nobody wanted to work with him. And they said, "Joe, you can have this one." And as I went to greet him, he says, "Hi, my name is Tom Cunningham." And I shook his hand. I said, "Nice to meet you, Joe Sinnona." And he says, "I want to list 5 of my 2-family houses with you." So
bingo.
That was sort of like the kickstart to my career.
And so you started in 1988, is that right?
1989.
1989. My math is wrong, I guess, in my head.
Yeah.
It's 1989.
Years, but I start my 29th year on September 13th. I started my 29th year.
Got you. So what were the interest rates like?
They were about, if I remember correctly, around 10 or 11%. And they were, basically up there, and people weren't as motivated to buy. There was 600 properties on the market here in Long Beach, I remember, and there was about 700 condos and co-ops. So we could say we had a lot of supply and very little demand. And it was a true buyer's market. I remember a local newspaper advertising how to look for the signs of a motivated seller. And every week they were counseling buyers on how to buy in the market that we were in. And it was just two things working against each other. And that's why I went door to door, because a lot of people didn't have a sense of who any realtor in the area was, because they hadn't met them face to face. So I was the only one doing it in the face of winter. And I did it between November and March. And I remember these old ladies taking me into their homes and giving me hot chocolate and tea and scones. And I got to know them, and they became my client base. And I built up a 15, 20, senior citizen pool that basically felt sorry for me and gave me business.
Well, couple things.
I owe them all my success.
Couple of things I'm hearing. So number one, you were inspired by the Honeymooners.
Yes.
Right? The Honeymooners. Ed went door to door. For our younger listeners or younger viewers who might be watching, just Google the Honeymooners. It'll come up. Famous, iconic show. To the Moon, Alice is one of the taglines I like to say to my wife every once in a while, jokingly, of course. But then also that you were willing to do what other people weren't willing to do. Like at that time, people were scared to go door to door. And like you said, it's pre-internet. So nobody knew your face unless they did business with you. And you went out and you did what other people weren't doing. And not because somebody told you, because you were like, hey, I got to do something to succeed. Am I right?
Yeah, because I was ready to quit the business at that point because I had no real structure, nobody telling me, hey, now you got to do it this week and you got to train this week. I mean, there was training, but it wasn't like the training we see today where you go to classes and you have professional development. And even though my association, my real estate association, had that training, I wasn't being pushed to go there and say, hey, you know what, learn the computer, learn here, because there was really no computer to even speak of. There was this little box called, there was this little green box of a computer, and it was one computer in the office, and everybody worked the computer and took turns using it because nobody had a laptop or their own desktop to speak of.
So let's talk about that moment when you're sitting there in the office and like you said, you're almost ready to quit. Like what you were sitting there and you're like, man, something's got to give, or I got to get out. Like what was that defining moment where you knew you had to make a decision?
I have to tell you, if it wasn't for my mom, living with my mom, and really that waitering job at night, in the catering, I was like really busting it to just make money, just to get by. Because remember, I was going to college and student teaching, and then teaching and taking the car and gas money. Expenses were very minimal, but it was a moment where I wanted to make some real money, and the real estate business wasn't doing it for me. It was just very frustrating. And I said, I don't think this market's ever getting better. It's getting worse. And it was getting progressively worse as I was in it. So I just said, either I'm going to choose to do something or not do something. And I didn't know I didn't know the differences between, vanilla and chocolate, the way I do now, the way I choose to do something or not to choose something. But I said, you know what, I'm going to give it one more shot with this little stupid ad that I'm putting on the flyer. And I'm going to go door to door with it. And, I started to realize that there were people in the community that needed my help. And then I started to realize that I was branding myself as a super agent because they would call the office and ask for the super agent. And it was sort of like a gimmick that worked. And I don't think anybody could do that today, but you could probably go door to door today. Same concept, branding yourself. And I see a lot of people there with their gimmicks today, but I think you just need to be you and be sincere, and that's what I was. I was sincere, and I was telling people, I haven't made any money. I haven't made $1 yet. And I think a lot of people felt sorry for me because I was new. I was brand new to the business, and I hadn't achieved that level of success that most agents achieve, and some of them do in their first year and some of them don't do. But not to give up. That's the point. Don't give up.
Yeah, and I think that's a good message because it's so often people, they go to like rah-rah seminars and they hear, oh yeah, you know what, my first year I sold 100 properties and this and that, and they hear all the good things, and that's a big part of why we're doing these MilleniWHO Talks, is to hear the behind the scenes story about, there comes a time in everybody's career where it's not all, like you see on TV with $1 million listings and fancy cars. There's times where you're struggling to make ends meet, and you have to weather the storm or have a plan in place or have somebody that can help you or have some kind of, like you said, like a side job,
right,
and real estate, but then have a little something just to help you, get over those times where it's really the tipping point. There's that time where if you can push through, there's light at the end of the tunnel.
There is.
And I remember I said this to a client recently. I go, because we're always in a transaction, you're focused on, don't worry, there's light at the end of the tunnel. She goes, yeah, but sometimes I feel like it's a train coming back at me.
Well, there is that moment too in real estate when you don't have a proper business plan in place, and you're sitting there, and then the train does come at you and wrecks everything that you've ever built up. Speaking of seminars, I started to go to seminars. I started to learn a little bit more of how to brand myself. And I remember meeting Tom Hopkins a year later. And I remember telling him the story about how I was listening to his tapes over and over again until I programmed myself to feel positive, to get that 21-day fix so that I could use it as a, what they call that, a self-fulfilling prophecy. And
right.
I had to feel positive about my career, my new career, I should say, because this was just the start. And already I had 10 listings from going door to door, 5 more from a client that wanted to sell all his 2-family houses. And I was on a roll. I became a very big listing king. And and a lot of people were coming to me, and I was learning as I went. And I started to learn about people, and I started to study personalities, and I went to personality seminars. There was a ton of work that an agent has to do in order to build a business. And it goes beyond the scope of selling and listing. It has to do with dealing with people. And if you can't deal with people, you can't be in this business.
There's no doubt. And, like you said about honing your crafts, I hopped up off my chair because I'm in my office, and I just wanted to shout out to Daryl Davis. I don't know how this objection handling arsenal. Okay, these are CDs, which are, I think I probably had these for 10 years. It was like, there's only so many objections you're going to hear, so you got to hone your craft, if you will, and because you're going to keep hearing the same objections from sellers. And for me, when I first started, it was the same thing. I went out, nobody else was willing to,
right?
And I said, if it's up to me, and I have to succeed, I got to do something. I can't wait for it to happen.
I think after the first year, I read the book called "Awaken the Giant Within" by Tony Robbins, and I realized that there was a big giant inside of me that had to come out, because although I was just doing the listing thing, I had to do the selling as well as the listing. And I didn't know how to do that. I didn't have any direction for that other than say, well, list your properties and then sell them yourself. But where was the plan? Where was the structure? I didn't have that,
Right. Well, let's tour as you were coming up through because I think that's important for new folks starting in the business, having somebody that they can bounce things off of. I think the big mistake a lot of people think is, by sharing something with a colleague or a coworker, that they're going to steal their ideas. And real estate's not like that. We're so willing to help one another. So was there somebody in your life that was a mentor, real estate wise, or, just to help you through the years?
Well, obviously my first brokers were my mentors, and they built that little base for me to start in the real estate business. And then the tide shift where, the learning just, became just stagnant. And then I had to make a move and then go to my next broker, who taught me the art of negotiations and how to cleverly get people to commit to a decision on buying or selling. And I remember, I was taught the soft sell approach. Now I'm being taught the hard sell approach, and then the clever approach to and the psychology of buying and selling. And then it was just from that point on, I started to go to and get that professional development that I needed. And had I known back then that the designations in real estate were the specialties of today, that, we use them as specialties, SRS, sales representative specialist, senior residential specialist, these designations help us build, that base that we're looking for, and they make us the specialists that we are, you know. So had I known that, I would have taken those classes. I would have done my GRI, Graduate Realty Institute, to know the real estate business a little bit better, to become a true professional. I would have done that back then, and then had all those designations to make me a better agent.
So are you saying education is a key to success?
Totally. That, and coupled with, you know, after you've done your 22 and a half hours of continuing education, every agent should put at least one piece of professional development into their career every year. And I've learned that over the years, and that's where you find your mentors, whether it be the teachers that teach you at these classes over and over again, and you model yourself after those people. You know, I've have several mentors in the business that, you know, you watch them, how they manage their companies, how they manage their people, how basically they have one of the best reputations, and as they're walking, you can actually see, I have a good reputation in the words behind them. It's like these little clouds of good, you know. And you know, you do meet the good people along the way. And going back to, you know, mentors, you know, in the business, I have several mentors in the business. You're one of my mentors in the business, because you know, you've taught me a lot on technology and video. So choose your mentors very carefully is what my advice would be to young people today.
I think the message you want to send out there is don't be afraid to ask, because anybody that's been in the business for more than a year is always willing to help out. I have people ask me, hey, could you help me out with this and that? And I don't care what company they're working for. I'm not trying to recruit them. It's just people helping people. And you know, that's what it's all about. Let's segue into leadership now, because you have been, you're still involved with leadership. At what point in your career and why, let's say when and why, did you get involved with leadership?
So I became a multiple listing director about 15 years ago, because it was merely out of anger. I had an offer and I couldn't present it, and the agent wasn't willing to present it in the proper way and would not let me speak to his or her owner. And I realized that there was a little bit of power behind being a multiple listing director, that no one is going to mess with an MLS director. So I'm going to try my best to get on that MLS board. I asked somebody to recommend me, and I got on the board. And then I realized that by being on the board, people were asking me for help, people asking me to enforce the rules. And so I started to, you know, basically tell two brokers in the business a long time, longer than me, to play nice in the sandbox together. That was my famous tagline. Whenever somebody would bring their problem with me, I go, okay, you guys are going to play nice in the sandbox together, because that's what I'm here to do. I'm here not to lean on one versus the other, but to make sure that the two of you come together. And I did it for 15 years. I recently stepped down as the MLS director, and I had a great time on doing it. But I realized that it's time to pass that baton to someone else in leadership, and to go on to something else in my career. So I'm very happy as to where I was, where I am today. And I'm happy that I have given that kind of service to the MLS. And in that period of time, I became the Long Island Board of Realtors director, because I wanted to understand the educational component of our organization. So, and I knew that by getting on that organization, I could be a voice of 26,000 agents that are represented today. And that's what leadership is being a voice to others, not just standing there for the simple fact that you have an ego and you got to get up at the podium and you got to talk every time there's a board meeting. No, you
Right.
represent the voice of your membership when you take on a leadership position.
So, I mean, that brings me to another point. what's in it for me? Because that's the question I always get when I try to talk to people and say, you need to get involved in leadership. It's unbelievable what you get back. Like I tell people I'm selfish that I'm involved in leadership because I get more out of it than anybody can get from my service, if that makes sense. Like I love giving back to people, and that the feeling that you get and being able to help others, and like you said, having an impact on the industry, knowing that you're making it a better place and making sure brokers play nice in the sandbox, like you said, which is funny because you're on the water there and it's the beach. But so what's in it for me? Like out of those 10 years, and really you're still involved with leadership because you're the first ever president of the Women's Council of Realtors Long Island Network, if that's right, if I said it correctly.
And that was just recently. I was installed as the first male president, and the reason for being in that role is to make sure that we don't forget as men that women play a very, very great role in our business, and that they should be celebrated, especially in a time where women are coming out and having all sorts of issues with men who did not behave rather civilized. So now I'm in a position of leadership to prove to other men that they can step up, they can join this organization, they can be part of a circle of women that have demonstrated and will demonstrate their true leadership abilities. They will find their voice amongst others, and they will bring it to the forefront and be courageous enough to hold certain types of leadership positions in Women's Council. And I have the dubious distinction of setting that example for both men and women of Women's Council. And it's kind of cool because I have to tell you, I wanted to become president to become a speaker and enhance my speaking ability. And throughout this process, I've learned that, this is more than just that. What's in it for me? That question. So I asked, what's in it for me? And now I find that I'm giving back to others that way. And I've invested a lot of time and energy to try to lead this organization into greatness.
So what kind of benefit could you see it, a tangible thing that you could say, okay, I've been involved in a transaction with somebody that I knew from serving here, and it helped that transaction go a little bit better than it would have if I wasn't involved in leadership and we hadn't built that rapport. Or, this is the things that Melissa Gomez that we interviewed last week. Mm-hmm. Do you see some of that as well? Like just the relationships that you build being involved in leadership helps you transact?
If an agent stays at their desk or at their workstation and they're not involved in leadership or any type of volunteer service, no one is going to know who they are, first and foremost. No one's going to know to refer that agent for that specific town or that specialty that agent possesses. So once I got involved in my leadership of Long Island Board of Realtors or even the Women's Council, I've been getting referrals from not a ton of referrals, but referrals I would have never received had I not been in that position.
Right. Well, but also it's not always a dollars and cents, right? Like you're in a multiple offer situation. You could be representing a buyer and the listing agent say, you know what, I know Joe from working with him on a committee or on leadership somewhere, and I know he's going to do a great job. And if everything else is the same, that's going to help your offer, come out on top, I would imagine, right?
Well, and people, there's a trust factor too. I know Joe from Women's Council or Long Island Board of Realtors. He's got a reputable reputation. He's reputable. He's got that strong reputation in the industry, many years of knowledge. He's the consummate professional. There's a lot of trust because that's how I feel dealing with my colleagues that are working in the Long Island Board of Realtors, even Women's Council. I'm not just going to sit there and deal with just anybody and not know their habits. because it is about, having good habits in real estate that makes us true professionals to the consumer.
All right, let's talk a little bit about balance. I see like a teeter-totter, right, in my life. One side is family, personal, the other side is business, and you're like this. So how do we find the balance? How do you find the balance? And I know you have two beautiful daughters, wonderful wife, Maria. How do you find the balance? What's your secret?
I have to tell you, a very, very supportive and loving atmosphere at home makes me do the things that I do, or allows me to do the things I do, because we're just, it's more than just Women's Council. I sit on the state as a director. I sit on the national as a committeeman for housing opportunities. There's trips involved. And then, I'm running 3 businesses essentially, as a realtor, as a speaker, as a trainer. And balance is something that we all try to, achieve and weigh in. But I have to tell you, if we got our personal wheel, I'll make it into like a wheel. And if we have a personal wheel this way, and we know that we're feeding that wheel with good positive energy, and we're giving them a heads up how the wheel is going to be turning this month, and then you have your financial picture wheel, and you make this wheel over here turn nicely by feeding that with, so you don't have to worry about your bills. And then you have your responsibility wheel, where you have to make sure that, your time management, your planning is all in place, so that all 3 wheels just sort of balance. And it's a very hard thing to do, because sometimes that one wheel will just shift out of balance and make the other wheels just shift out of balance. So it's a constant work. It's a constant, look at, with a fine lens. That's why business planning for the next year is important. And you don't do it on December 31st, like most people do. Right. When they make their resolutions, right? You got to do it now. You got to clean up now. Yesterday, I cleaned up my file cabinet, getting ready for 2018 transactions, so that I'm ready. I got to be ready for that. And you got to be one step ahead of yourself.
Yeah. And I think, part of what you're saying and stepping down as the MLS director, that's part of getting balance back in your life, right? Because you looked at all of your obligations and your volunteering opportunities, and you're like, okay, now's the time to pass the torch to somebody else. Let them have their moment and let them lead. And you, in turn, you get that little piece of that wheel, like you said, with a little bit more family time. We don't always, sometimes it's like, okay, I step down from here and I go volunteer over here. So then you're not helping out.
Well, I have to tell you something. This year, I hired for the first time in my career a training coach. And that coach, if I can just plug him, Stephen Littman, he gave me a good direction. He had me look at my whole career, my whole personal life. And he and I worked on a plan this year. I was an active member of 28 volunteer organizations, including being a multiple listing director. And I had to let go of 20 out of 28 organizations, because not only was it taking up my time, but it wasn't also producing a good return on investment for how many years that I was a part of that. And some of those volunteer organizations are the best, and you can meet a lot of people. But when you overextend yourself, you don't have time to do anything else. So I, in essence, freed about probably 11 to 15 hours of time and gained back 2 days of good personal time that I can invest, whether it be in my family or whether I can invest it in my business of speaking or business of real estate to list more. But it's still a work in progress. I still have more to do, especially when it comes to family, because family let's face it, in our industry, it always gets cheated out of good things, good moments, special things, special moments. And we only live once for our children, and we don't want to miss those special moments.
Yeah, and you and I were having that conversation offline where, nobody says at the end of their life, I wish I listed one more house, right? It's like I'm in my deathbed. Oh, if I would have only got the listing on the water. No, that's, enjoy the moments with your family, because in the end, that's all you have. And I know you're a big family guy too.
Yeah, and it's the truth, and that's going to be one of my biggest goals and part of my business plan. I have a vision board that I started this year. I always had a goal setting board for short-term goals and long-term goals, but our good friend Marky Lemons has a monthly goal, and I like that idea because then I can plan my month and by goal, plan my year goal by goal, and then I can put my personal goals up there as well as my business goals. And I like that whole plan, because now it's become a whole different vision board entirely for 2018. So that's what I'm working on now.
Yeah, I recently moved, not companies, but offices within my office. And so I was decorating. If you could see it in the background here, I have like my kids up, but then there's a little thing here, and it's a daddy line and a baby line. It says I thought about quitting, but then I noticed who was watching. And being big on family, that's always, when I'm having a bad day, I have a transaction that went bad, or a listing that somebody else ended up listing that I thought we all have those days. And it's always, staying focused on the why, why you got in this, why you got involved in this in the first place, why you're doing this each and every day, I think is important. But Joe, in closing, do you have any advice, let's say for new agents, or if you could go back, right? If you were the Joe of Christmas past, you could go back to yourself and say, here's some advice from me 30 years later, just getting started in the business, or even a new agent getting started. What would you say?
I reflect back to that first day that I went into someone's office, and I went to pick up some keys to show a co-op. And I remember the agents coming at me, 1, 2, 3, I think it was like 4 or 5 agents, just shoving keys in my face and telling me to show their co-ops. And there were 700 co-ops for sale at the time. And I remember them pushing it on me, and I thought that was the image of the real estate world. This cutthroat, this barracuda, this stepping on people one after the other just to make a buck. And I remember the owner at the time, his name was Jerry Metzger. He was a little guy in a big chair up here. He was like a little tiny guy. And he says, and he also had this authoritative figure, and this tone about him. And he said, he went like, silence. And he looked over because the other agents were laughing at me because I was new to the business. And he said, one day this young man is going to be somebody, and he's going to own his own brokerage, which is what eventually happened to me for 10 years. So I took that as a little lesson of, this man saw a vision of me that I did not see. And I think as a new agent, I know this to be true, that you have to create a vision for yourself. You have to see yourself 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So it starts with a vision or some sort of a blueprint for your success, as Tom Hopkins says. And you have to add certain parts to that vision, a business plan, professional development, designations, and you have to build it up and treat it like a business. And if I could go back to that guy at 19 years old, I would tell that guy, hey, start your business plan now, start your designations now, put all your professional development in for the first couple of years and build a nice base because that's not what I did. I learned as I went, and 28, 29 years almost later, you start to reflect on the things that you didn't do, and that now we're starting to play catch up. But I've done it. I've done it in the last 5 years alone. Had I done it in the beginning, that would have been great. So all you young people out there, you're just starting out in the business, number one, don't give up on your dreams. Envision what you need to do. But remember, this is, like Jeremiah said, it's not a fantasy, a reality show called real estate. You're not going to be selling real estate out of a limousine, and this is not a $1 million listing. It's not that way. It takes time, perseverance, and patience to be this successful.
Joe, that's a powerful message. For those who will be watching this back, who are not watching it live, be sure to subscribe on our YouTube channel. It's youtube.jmanseminars.com. Subscribe at the top. Be sure to hit there's a little bell there that, says get notified when new videos are posted, because we're actually at 4 videos scheduled, 4 of these interviews scheduled for this week. And our sole purpose is just to help others. And, Joe, thank you so much this morning for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for allowing me to do this. And by the way, you have done on these interviews what nobody has done, and that is inspire the young people. And I just want to point that out, because we owe you a lot for having this ability to do this. I know you're a very humble person, but this is a very good idea for young people to learn from this channel. And you should really subscribe to JMan's channel, because it will help you build that kind of a base for your business. So thank you again, JMan.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll see you. We're going to be back on Wednesday at 3:30. Hold on one moment. Bear with me as I look at the calendar. Let's see. Wednesday at 3:30, and we're going to be talking with Erica. That's all I'm going to say for now. Wednesday at 3:30. And Joe, thanks again. Stay safe out there and make it a great day, because it's a great day for real estate.
Happy holidays, everyone. Take care.